The woman standing beside the weathered canvas tent looked like she might blow away with the next gust of prairie wind. And Warren Dalton couldn't stop his horse from slowing as he rode past the edge of Wichita, Kansas, one scorching July afternoon in 1878. She was hanging laundry on a rope strung between two cottonwood saplings, her dark hair escaping from its pins, her dress patched but clean, and something about the determined set of her shoulders made his chest tighten with an emotion he couldn't quite name. He'd seen plenty of folks down on their luck in his 32 years, especially in the 5 years since he'd built up his cattle ranch north of town. But there was something different about this woman, something that made him tip his hat even though she hadn't looked his way. "Good afternoon," he called out, his voice rougher than he'd intended. She startled, dropping a pillowcase back into her basket before turning to face him. Her eyes were the color of creek water in summer, green and brown mixed together, and they assessed him with a wariness that spoke of hard experience. "Afternoon," she replied, her voice carrying a soft drawl that suggested she'd come from somewhere south of here. Warren shifted in his saddle, suddenly aware of how forward he must seem, stopping to speak to a woman he didn't know. "I'm Warren Dalton. I run a cattle operation about 5 miles north of town. I've ridden past here a few times and noticed your camp. Just wanted to make sure you're managing all right out here." Her chin lifted slightly, and he saw pride flash in those unusual eyes. "Hannah Dorsett, and I'm managing just fine, thank you." He should have ridden on then. Should have tipped his hat again and let his buckskin gelding carry him back toward his ranch where there was work waiting. But something kept him planted right there on the dusty road, watching as she retrieved the dropped pillowcase and shook the dust from it. "I don't mean to pry, Miss Dorsett, but it seems like rough living out here. Town's just a quarter mile that way, and there's a boarding house run by Mrs. Fletcher that takes in ladies. Mrs. Fletcher's boarding house costs $3 a week," Hannah said, her hands still working to pin up the laundry. "I make $2 a week, taking in washing and doing mending. So unless you know a way to make numbers work differently than they have since the beginning of time, I'll be staying right here." Despite himself, Warren felt a smile tug at his mouth. He liked her spirit, the way she didn't crumble under what had to be difficult circumstances. Fair enough. "But if you need anything, my ranch is up the north road. Can't miss it, biggest spread in these parts." She finally turned to look at him fully, and something passed between them in that moment, something electric and unexpected. Why would a rancher care about a woman living in a tent? The question wasn't accusatory, just genuinely curious. Warren found himself without a ready answer. Why did he care? He'd passed other folks in tough situations without stopping, had learned long ago that you couldn't save everyone in this hard land. But something about Hannah Dorsett had reached past all his careful defenses. "Maybe because it's the decent thing to do," he finally said. "And maybe because you remind me that there's still folks in this world trying to make an honest living, no matter how hard it gets." She studied him a moment longer, then gave a small nod. "I appreciate the kindness, Mr. Dalton, but I'll be fine." He tipped his hat once more and urged his horse forward, but his mind stayed on that camp for the entire ride home. It stayed with him as he checked on his cattle, as he worked with his 2 ranch hands to repair a section of fence, as he sat down to a solitary dinner in his too big house. He'd built that house 3 years ago, thinking he'd fill it with a family someday. But at 32 he was still alone, still eating meals by himself at a table meant for 6. That night, as heat lightning flickered on the horizon, Warren stood on his porch and thought about Hannah Dorsett in that tent. A storm was coming, he could feel it in his bones, and canvas walls wouldn't provide much protection. He told himself it wasn't his concern, that she'd made it clear she could take care of herself. But when he finally went to bed, sleep was a long time coming. The storm hit just after midnight, one of those violent prairie thunderstorms that seemed to shake the very earth. Warren lay awake listening to rain hammer against his roof, thinking about that tent on the edge of town. When dawn finally came gray and wet, he'd already made up his mind about what he was going to do, even if it was the most foolish decision he'd made in years. He rode into town early, the roads turned to mud, water still dripping from every surface. As he approached Hannah's camp, his heart sank. The tent had partially collapsed, one side caved in by the weight of water and wind. He dismounted quickly, his boots squelching in the mud, and called out, "Miss Dorsett." "Hannah." She emerged from the sagging tent, soaked through, her hair plastered to her face, but her eyes blazed with determination, not defeat. "I'm all right, just need to get this set back up once things dry out." Warren looked at the damage, at the puddles of water inside the tent, at the way everything she owned was wet and muddy. Something cracked open in his chest, something he'd kept carefully guarded since his parents had died in a cholera outbreak 7 years ago. "This is foolishness," he said, his voice coming out harder than he meant. "You can't live like this." "I don't have much choice," she replied, wringing water from her skirt, "unless you've got a better suggestion." The words came out before he could think them through. "I do, actually. Come work for me. I need someone to cook and keep house, and the position includes room and board. You'd have your own room, proper walls and a roof, 3 meals a day, and I'll pay you $5 a week on top of it." Hannah's eyes went wide. "I don't even know you." "No, you don't. But you can ask anyone in town about me. I'm honest, I keep my word, and I'm offering you a fair deal. Better than this, anyway." He gestured at the collapsed tent. She stood there shivering in her wet clothes, and he could see the war happening behind her eyes. Pride versus practicality, independence versus need. Finally, she wrapped her arms around herself and spoke. "Why would you do this? You don't know me either. I could be a thief or worse." Warren met her gaze steadily. "You're not. I can tell that much just from looking at you. You're someone who's had some bad luck but hasn't let it break you, and I respect that." "I won't be anyone's kept woman," she said firmly. "If I come work for you, it's a proper job with proper boundaries." "I wouldn't have it any other way," Warren assured her. "I'm offering employment, nothing more and nothing less. Though I'll tell you straight that I'm hoping we might become friends along the way, because this land gets lonely sometimes." Hannah was quiet for a long moment, water dripping from her hair, her dress, everything she owned. Then she nodded. "All right, but I'll need to bring my things." "What's not ruined by the storm, you mean," Warren said gently. "Pack up what you can salvage and I'll help you load it." It didn't take long. Hannah Dorsett's entire worldly possessions fit into 2 carpet bags and a small trunk. As Warren secured them behind his saddle, he felt the weight of responsibility settle over him. He'd made an impulsive decision, bringing a stranger into his home, but looking at her face as she took one last look at that collapsed tent, he knew he'd made the right choice. The ride to his ranch was quiet, with Hannah sitting behind him on his horse since she had none of her own. She held carefully to the back of his saddle rather than to him, maintaining that distance she'd insisted upon. Warren found himself acutely aware of her presence anyway, of the way she felt against his back when the horse stumbled slightly, of the small gasp she made when his ranch came into view over the rise. It was a good spread, he had to admit. The house stood 2 stories tall, painted white with a wide porch wrapping around 3 sides. The barn was solid and well-maintained, the corrals sturdy, the bunkhouse for his ranch hands neat and square. 500 acres of good grazing land stretched out in all directions, dotted with his cattle. "This is all yours?" Hannah asked, something like awe in her voice. "Built it up from nothing over the past 5 years," Warren said, unable to keep a note of pride from his voice. "Started with 50 head of cattle and a lot of determination. Now I'm running close to 500 head. He helped her down from the horse and carried her bags up onto the porch. The house felt different somehow, just having another person about to enter it. He'd kept it clean enough, but it had that bachelor emptiness to it, that sense of being a structure rather than a home. "Let me show you around," he said, opening the door. The main floor held a large kitchen with a proper cast iron stove, a dining room with that too-big table, a sitting room with comfortable furniture, and his office where he kept his accounts. Upstairs were 4 bedrooms, though only one was furnished as his own. "You can take this room," Warren said, opening the door to the bedroom at the far end of the hall from his own. "It gets good morning light, and it's got a decent view of the eastern pastures." Hannah walked into the room slowly, her wet boots leaving prints on the floor. There was a bed frame but no mattress, a dresser, a wardrobe, and a window with lace curtains his mother had made years ago. She touched the curtains gently, as if they might disappear. "I'll bring up a mattress from storage," Warren said. "And there's linens in the chest in the hall. You'll want to get into dry clothes before you catch your death. I'll wait downstairs and put coffee on." He left her there and headed back down, his mind racing. What had he done? He'd brought a woman he barely knew into his home, offered her employment and shelter, all because something in her eyes had reached past his defenses. It was impulsive and probably foolish, and yet he couldn't bring himself to regret it. When Hannah came down 20 minutes later, she'd changed into a different dress, still worn but dry, and had done something with her hair so it was pinned back properly. She looked younger somehow, less worn down, and Warren realized she couldn't be much older than 23 or 24. "Thank you," she said simply. "For the room, for the job, for all of it." "You'll earn your keep," Warren said, pouring coffee into 2 cups. "I'm not much of a cook, and the place could use a woman's touch. My 2 ranch hands, Pete and Joe, they eat breakfast and dinner here. Lunch they usually manage on their own. Think you can handle cooking for 4? "I can handle it," Hannah said, accepting the coffee cup. Her hands wrapped around it like she was drawing warmth from it, even though the day was already heating up again after the storm. "I grew up cooking for a household of 8. This'll be easy by comparison." They sat at that big table, and Warren found himself wanting to know her story, wanting to understand how she'd ended up living in a tent on the edge of Wichita. But he held his tongue, sensing that pushing would only make her retreat behind those walls she'd built up. It was Hannah who finally spoke. "I suppose you're wondering how I ended up in that tent." "Only if you want to tell me," Warren said. "Your business is your own." She smiled slightly, the first real smile he'd seen from her. "That's kind of you. But if we're going to be living under the same roof, even if it's employer and employee, you deserve to know who you've taken in." She stared into her coffee cup for a moment before continuing. "I came to Kansas from Arkansas with my husband 2 years ago. Thomas had dreams of starting a freight business, hauling goods between towns. We pooled everything we had, bought a wagon and team. Things were going well at first." Her voice caught slightly, and Warren waited patiently for her to continue. "He was hauling supplies to Dodge City last winter when a blizzard hit. They found him 3 days later, frozen. He tried to keep the horses alive to save the cargo. That was Thomas, always putting everyone else first." She looked up at Warren, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "The freight company took the wagon and team to cover what was owed on them. I had about $20 to my name, no family, no way to get back to Arkansas even if I wanted to." "I'm sorry," Warren said, and meant it. "That's a hard road to travel." I found work doing laundry and mending, rented a room at Mrs. Fletcher's for a while. But then I got sick, missed 2 weeks of work, and couldn't pay my rent. By the time I recovered, she'd rented my room to someone else. That was 3 months ago. I've been in that tent ever since, saving every penny I can toward getting a proper place again. Warren felt anger surge through him, not at Hannah but at the unfairness of it all. A young woman widowed, robbed of everything by circumstances beyond her control, forced to live in a tent while trying to maintain her dignity and independence. "You won't have to worry about that anymore," he said firmly. "This is a good position, steady work with fair pay. You'll be back on your feet in no time." "Why are you being so kind to me?" Hannah asked, her eyes searching his face. "Nobody's been this kind since Thomas died." Warren considered the question carefully. "Maybe because I know what it's like to lose everything. My parents died of cholera 7 years back. I was 25 and suddenly the family farm was mine, along with all the debt they'd accrued. I sold that farm, came to Kansas with almost nothing, and built this place up from scratch. If someone had offered me a hand up instead of a handout during those hard years, I'd have taken it. So now I'm in a position to offer that hand, and it seems like the right thing to do." Understanding passed between them, a recognition of shared pain and survival. Hannah nodded slowly. "Then I'll work hard for you, Mr. Dalton. You won't regret taking me in." "I don't doubt that for a moment. And please call me Warren. Mr. Dalton makes me feel like an old man." "Warren, then," she said, and hearing his name in her voice sent an unexpected warmth through his chest. "And you'll call me Hannah." "Hannah," he repeated, liking the way it felt on his tongue. The next few days established a rhythm to their lives. Hannah proved to be an excellent cook, turning out meals that were simple but delicious. The house began to feel different too, cleaner somehow, more organized. She put flowers from the prairie in vases on the tables, mended the curtains that had grown threadbare, and generally brought life to the place. Warren found himself coming in from the range earlier than he used to, eager to see what she'd done, what small improvements she'd made. Pete and Joe, his ranch hands, both middle-aged men who'd worked for Warren for 3 years, were delighted with the change. "Best grub we've had since my Martha died," Pete said one evening, cleaning his plate for the second time. "No offense, boss, but your cooking was barely edible." Warren laughed, not offended in the least. "None taken. I know my limitations in the kitchen." He caught Hannah smiling at the exchange, a real smile that lit up her whole face, and felt his heart do something strange in his chest. He'd been telling himself this was purely a business arrangement, that he'd hired her out of kindness and practicality. But he couldn't deny the way he looked forward to seeing her each morning, the way he found excuses to come back to the house during the day, the way her presence made his too-big house finally feel like a home. 2 weeks after Hannah had moved in, Warren came back from checking the north pastures to find her in his office, standing in front of his bookshelf with a look of longing on her face. "You're welcome to borrow anything you'd like," he said, and she jumped, not having heard him enter. "I didn't mean to intrude," she said quickly. "I was just dusting and saw all these books. I haven't had anything to read in so long." "You like to read?" Warren asked, moving closer to the bookshelf. "Love to," Hannah said, her eyes bright. "Thomas used to tease me about always having my nose in a book. We had to leave most of mine behind when we moved west, and then after he died, I sold the few I'd kept to buy food." Warren reached up and pulled down a worn copy of Pride and Prejudice. "This was my mother's. She loved this story, read it every year. I think she'd be happy knowing someone else was enjoying it." Hannah took the book reverently, her fingers tracing the spine. "Are you sure?" "Positive. And there's plenty more where that came from." My mother was a school teacher back in Ohio before she married my father. She brought her whole library west with her. She sounds like a remarkable woman, Hannah said softly. She was, Warren agreed. She'd have liked you, I think. She always said the measure of a person wasn't in what life handed them, but in how they handled it. Hannah looked up at him, and something in her expression made his breath catch. They were standing close, closer than they usually did, and he could see gold flecks in her green-brown eyes. For a moment, he thought about reaching out, about touching her face, about closing the distance between them. But he remembered his promise, remembered that she'd come here as his employee, that she'd been clear about boundaries. He stepped back, clearing his throat. I should wash up for supper. Smells like you've made something good. Chicken and dumplings, Hannah said, her voice a little breathless. It'll be ready in about 20 minutes. Warren nodded and left the office, his heart pounding harder than it should. This was dangerous territory, these feelings growing inside him. Hannah was vulnerable, dependent on him for her livelihood and shelter. The last thing he wanted was to take advantage of that. But Lord, it was getting harder to deny what he felt every time he looked at her. That night, as he lay in bed, he heard her moving around in her room down the hall. He imagined her curled up with his mother's book, reading by lamplight, and the image made him smile into the darkness. He'd been alone for so long, had convinced himself he preferred it that way. But having Hannah here had shown him what he'd been missing. The comfort of another presence in his home, the warmth of conversation over meals, the simple pleasure of caring for someone and being cared for in return. He was falling for her, he realized. Maybe it had been since that first moment he'd seen her hanging laundry by her tent. The realization should have terrified him, but instead, it felt right, like something that had been inevitable from the start. The question was, did she feel anything for him beyond gratitude? Summer deepened into August, and the days grew long and hot. Warren found excuses to include Hannah in more aspects of ranch life. He taught her to ride on his gentlest mare, a sweet-tempered bay named Daisy. Hannah proved a quick learner, fearless in the saddle once she got her balance. They rode out together in the evenings sometimes, after the day's work was done, and those were Warren's favorite times. Out on the prairie with the sun setting, they could talk freely, the boundaries between employer and employee blurring into something more like friendship. "Tell me about building this place," Hannah said one evening as they sat their horses on a rise overlooking the ranch. "How did you go from nothing to all this?" Warren considered how to answer, not used to talking about himself. Stubbornness, mostly. "When I came to Kansas, I had enough money from selling my parents' farm to buy 50 head of cattle and lease some grazing land. Lived in a tent myself that first year, saving every penny to buy property. When I found this land, I knew it was right. Good grass, access to water, close enough to town to get supplies but far enough out to have room to grow." "And you built the house yourself?" Hannah asked. "With help from Pete and Joe, yeah. Took us the better part of a year, working on it between handling the cattle. I wanted something solid, something that would last, something I could fill with a family someday." He hadn't meant to add that last part, but it slipped out anyway. Hannah was quiet for a moment. "You never married," came close once back in Ohio, girl named Sarah. "But after my parents died and I decided to come west, she didn't want to leave her family. Can't say I blamed her. This is a hard life out here. Do you regret it? Coming west, I mean." Warren looked out over his land, at the cattle dotting the pastures, at his house standing solid and white in the evening light. "No, this feels like where I'm meant to be. What about you? Do you regret coming west?" Hannah's expression grew thoughtful. "I regret that Thomas died. I regret that our dreams didn't come true. But I don't regret the journey itself. There's something about this land, about the openness of it, that feels like freedom. Even when things were at their worst, living in that tent, I felt more myself here than I ever did back in Arkansas. Why's that? Warren asked gently. Because here, I'm not defined by who my father was or what family I came from. Here, I'm just Hannah making my own way. For a woman, that's a rare thing. Warren understood what she meant. The West offered opportunities that the settled East didn't, a chance to reinvent yourself, to build something from nothing. You've got grit, Hannah Dorsett, more than most people I've known. She turned to look at him, and the setting sun caught her face, turning her skin golden. I could say the same about you, Warren Dalton. They held each other's gaze, and Warren felt that pull again, that magnetic attraction that had been growing stronger every day. But he held back, reminding himself to be patient, to let things develop naturally. Hannah deserved that respect. As August gave way to September, Warren realized he'd been happier in the past 2 months than he had in years. The ranch was thriving, the cattle fattening up nicely for market, and coming home each day was a joy rather than just a relief from work. Hannah's presence had transformed not just his house but his whole life. It was Hannah who suggested they host a small gathering. "You've been so generous to me," she said one morning over breakfast. "The least I can do is help you show some hospitality to your neighbors." "When's the last time you had folks over for a meal?" Warren had to think about it. "Not since before my parents died. 7 years, I guess." "That's too long," Hannah said firmly. "What about inviting some of the other ranchers and their families? I could make a nice dinner, and it would be good for you to strengthen those connections." She was right, Warren knew. He'd been so focused on building his ranch that he'd let his social connections atrophy. "All right. We could invite the Morgans from the spread west of here, and the Hutchinsons to the south. Both good people." Planning the dinner gave them a project to work on together. Hannah threw herself into preparations with enthusiasm, planning a menu, making lists of what needed to be bought in town. Warren found himself drawn into her excitement, enjoying the way her eyes lit up as she talked about making his mother's good china shine. The dinner was set for a Saturday evening in mid-September. Warren rode into town that morning to buy supplies, and on his way back, he passed the place where Hannah's tent had stood. The ground was empty now, just a bare patch of earth, and he felt a rush of gratitude that she was no longer there, no longer struggling alone. That evening, as the guests began to arrive, Warren felt nervous in a way he hadn't expected. He wanted the evening to go well, partly for business reasons but mostly because he wanted people to see Hannah, to recognize her worth. She'd worked so hard to overcome her circumstances, and he wanted others to treat her with the respect she deserved. He needn't have worried. Hannah was a natural hostess, gracious and warm, putting everyone at ease. She transformed the dining room, with his mother's china gleaming on the table, candles flickering in holders, and flowers from the prairie arranged in vases. The meal she'd prepared was delicious, and the conversation flowed easily. "You've done well for yourself, Warren," Charles Morgan said, a prosperous rancher in his 50s. "This is a fine spread, and if you don't mind my saying, having Miss Dorsett here has brought a real warmth to the place." "I agree completely," Warren said, catching Hannah's eye across the table. She blushed slightly but smiled, and he felt his heart swell with pride and something deeper, something he was finally ready to name as love. After the guests had left and they'd cleaned up together, Warren walked Hannah out onto the porch. The night was clear and cool, with stars scattered across the sky like diamond dust. "Thank you for tonight," Warren said. "It was perfect." "I enjoyed it," Hannah replied. "It's been a long time since I felt like I was part of something, like I belonged somewhere." "You belong here," Warren said, the words coming from his heart. You've made this house a home, Hannah. I don't know how I managed before you came." She turned to face him, and in the moonlight she looked beautiful. "Warren, I need to tell you something." His heart began to pound. "What is it?" "When I came here, I promised myself I'd keep things professional, that I wouldn't let feelings get in the way of a good job. But I've failed at that." She took a breath. "I've developed feelings for you, feelings that go beyond gratitude or friendship. And I know that's not what you signed up for when you hired me, so if you need me to leave, I'll understand." Relief and joy flooded through Warren. "Leave? Hannah, the last thing I want is for you to leave." "I've been feeling the same way, but I didn't want to say anything because I didn't want you to feel pressured. You work for me, you live in my house, and I didn't want you to think I expected anything." "So you feel it too?" Hannah asked, hope shining in her eyes. "This connection between us?" "I've felt it from the first moment I saw you," Warren admitted. "Standing by that tent, hanging laundry, looking like you were ready to take on the whole world by yourself. You took my breath away then, and you still do every single day." Hannah stepped closer to him. "What do we do about it?" Warren reached out slowly, giving her time to pull back if she wanted, and cupped her face gently in his hand. "I think we stop fighting it. I think we see where these feelings take us, if you're willing." "I'm willing," Hannah whispered, and then she rose up on her toes and kissed him. The kiss was soft and sweet and full of promise. Warren wrapped his arms around her, holding her close, feeling like he'd finally found something he'd been searching for his whole life. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless. "I should probably court you properly," Warren said, his forehead resting against hers. "Take you to church socials, bring you flowers, do this the right way." Hannah laughed softly. "We've been living under the same roof for 3 months, cooking together, eating together, talking late into the night. I think we've been courting all along without realizing it." "Good point," Warren said, grinning. "But I'm still going to bring you flowers." They stood there on the porch for a long time, wrapped in each other's arms, making plans and promises. Two people who'd found each other against all odds in the wide Kansas prairie. The next few months passed in a haze of happiness. Warren courted Hannah properly, despite her protests that it wasn't necessary, bringing her wildflowers from the prairie, taking her into town for the harvest festival, sitting beside her in church on Sundays. The whole town of Wichita seemed to approve of their courtship, with folks stopping Warren on the street to tell him how lucky he was. He knew it. Every single day, he counted his blessings that he'd ridden past that tent on that July afternoon, that he'd had the courage to stop and speak to her, that she'd accepted his offer of work. By the time October arrived, painting the prairie in golds and russets, Warren knew what he wanted to do. He wanted to marry Hannah, to make their arrangement permanent, to build a life together. But he wanted to do it right, wanted to give her a proper proposal, something she could remember for the rest of their lives. He enlisted Pete's help to build something he'd been planning for weeks. "I want to build her a house," Warren told his ranch hand one morning. "A small one, just one room really, but solid. Somewhere private where she can go to read or think or just be alone when she needs it." Pete looked at him like he'd lost his mind. "Boss, she already lives in your house." "I know. But before she came here, she was living in that tent, had been for months. She never complained about it, just kept her dignity and did what she had to do. I want to give her a house of her own, something that's just hers, to show her that I understand how important independence is to her." Understanding dawned on Pete's weathered face. "That's real thoughtful, boss. Real romantic, too, if you don't mind me saying." "I don't mind. Will you help me?" "Course I will." They worked on it in secret over the next 2 weeks, building the small structure on a rise about 100 yards from the main house. It was just one room, maybe 15 feet square, with a large window facing east to catch the morning light, a small stove for heat, and built-in bookshelves along one wall. Warren furnished it simply but comfortably, with a reading chair, a small desk, and a rug to warm the floor. When it was finished, he brought Hannah out to see it one crisp October morning. She'd been curious about why he kept disappearing for hours at a time, but he'd put her off with vague explanations about ranch business. "Close your eyes," he said as they approached the rise. "Warren, what have you done?" Hannah asked, but she closed her eyes obediently, letting him guide her forward. "Okay, open them." Hannah's eyes flew open and she gasped. The little house sat there in the morning sun, its windows gleaming, a stone path leading to the door. "What is this?" "It's yours," Warren said. "Your house. I built it for you." She turned to him, tears streaming down her face. "You built me a house." "You were living in a tent when I met you," Warren said, taking her hands in his. "You'd lost everything but never lost yourself. You kept your dignity, your strength, your kindness. I wanted to give you something that could never be taken away, something that's yours and only yours." "But why?" Hannah asked, though he could see she was beginning to understand. "Because I love you," Warren said simply. "I'm in love with you, Hannah Dorsett. I have been since that first day, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you. I want to fill that big house with children and laughter and love. I want to grow old with you, build a life with you, face whatever comes with you by my side. But I also know that you value your independence, that you need to know you can stand on your own. So this is my gift to you and my promise. If you marry me, you'll never be dependent or powerless. You'll always have this place, always have your own space, always have your independence." Hannah was crying openly now, but she was smiling too. "You built me a house." "I built you a house," Warren confirmed, "but I'm hoping you'll spend most of your time in the big house with me, as my wife if you'll have me." "Yes," Hannah said, laughing and crying at the same time. "Yes, I'll marry you. I love you too, Warren. I've been so scared to hope for this, to believe that happiness like this could be real after everything that happened." Warren pulled her into his arms and kissed her thoroughly, pouring all his love and commitment into that kiss. When they finally broke apart, he led her inside her new house to show her all the details he'd included, the bookshelves ready to be filled, the window seat he'd built, the little touches he'd added with her in mind. "I can't believe you did this," Hannah said, running her hands over the desk. "No one's ever done anything like this for me." "Get used to it," Warren said, wrapping his arms around her from behind. "I plan to spend the rest of my life finding ways to make you happy." They set the wedding for early November, before winter could set in. It was a simple ceremony at the church in Wichita, with most of the town in attendance. Hannah wore a dress she'd made herself, a beautiful creation in deep blue that brought out the green in her eyes. Warren wore his best suit and thought his heart might burst with pride and love as she walked down the aisle toward him. "Dearly beloved," the minister began, and Warren barely heard the rest. He was too focused on Hannah, on the way she was looking at him like he'd hung the moon, on the fact that in a few minutes she'd be his wife. When it came time for the vows, Warren spoke clearly and firmly. "I, Warren Dalton, take you, Hannah Dorsett, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love you, honor you, respect you, and stand beside you through whatever life brings. I promise to value your independence as much as our partnership, to listen when you speak, and to build a life with you that honors both of us." Hannah's voice was strong despite the tears on her cheeks. "I, Hannah Dorsett, take you, Warren Dalton, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love you with all my heart, to be your partner in all things, to support your dreams as you support mine, and to fill our home with joy and laughter. I promise to face every challenge beside you and to celebrate every triumph with you." When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Warren kissed her with all the love in his heart, and the church erupted in applause. The reception was held at their ranch, with tables set up in the barn and food enough to feed the whole county. Pete and Joe had decorated with lanterns and fall flowers, and someone had brought a fiddle, filling the evening with music. Warren danced with his bride, holding her close, unable to stop smiling. "Happy?" he asked her during a slow song. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Hannah replied. "When I was in that tent, surviving day to day, I never imagined this. I never thought I'd find love again, find a home, find a future." "We'll build that future together," Warren promised. "Whatever comes, we'll face it together." Later that night, after the guests had gone home and they'd climbed the stairs to what was now their shared bedroom, Warren carried Hannah over the threshold, making her laugh. "I can walk, you know," she said. "I know. But this is traditional and I want to do this right." He set her down gently and she turned to face him, suddenly shy despite everything they'd been through together. Warren understood. This was a new beginning, a new chapter in both their lives. "I love you, Hannah Dalton," he said, using her married name for the first time. "And I love you, Warren Dalton," she replied, reaching up to pull him down for a kiss. That night, they made their marriage complete, coming together with tenderness and passion, two souls who'd found each other against all odds. Afterward, lying in each other's arms, Warren felt a peace he'd never known before. This was what he'd been building toward all along, he realized. Not just the ranch or the house or the success, but this feeling of completeness, of having found his other half. Winter came to Kansas with snow and cold winds, but inside their home, Warren and Hannah were warm and content. They developed new routines as a married couple, cooking together in the mornings, working side by side during the day, spending long evenings by the fire. Hannah still used her little house sometimes, retreating there to read or work on her sewing projects, and Warren loved that she had that space, that independence within their partnership. Christmas was their first holiday as husband and wife, and they celebrated with Pete and Joe, creating new traditions. Warren gave Hannah books to fill the shelves in her little house, and she gave him a hand-knit sweater she'd been secretly working on for months. "It's perfect," Warren said, pulling it on, "just like you." "I'm not perfect," Hannah protested, but she was smiling. "You are to me," Warren insisted, pulling her into his lap. "You're exactly what I needed, even when I didn't know I needed it." As winter gave way to spring, Hannah began to feel unwell in the mornings. At first, she tried to hide it, but Warren noticed everything about her, including the way she'd turn pale and have to excuse herself from breakfast. "Hannah, what's wrong?" he asked one morning after she'd returned from being sick outside. "Should we get the doctor?" She looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite read, something between joy and fear. "I think I might be with child." Warren felt the world tilt on its axis. "You think you're pregnant?" "I'm late and the morning sickness and I've been so tired lately." Hannah bit her lip. "Are you happy about it? I know we haven't been married long." Happy didn't begin to cover what Warren felt. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "I'm thrilled." Overwhelmed and a little scared, but mostly thrilled. "Are you happy?" "Yes," Hannah said, relaxing against him. "I'm happy. Scared too, but happy. I lost a baby early in my marriage to Thomas before we came west. I've been afraid to hope I could carry a child to term." "Whatever happens, we'll face it together," Warren promised. "But I have a good feeling about this. I think everything's going to be just fine." The doctor confirmed the pregnancy a week later, estimating the baby would arrive in October. Warren immediately became overprotective, insisting Hannah rest more, not lift heavy things, take care of herself. She tolerated his fussing with good humor, understanding it came from love. As spring turned to summer and Hannah's belly began to swell with their child, Warren found himself even more in love with her than before. She had a glow about her, a contentment that made her beautiful in a whole new way. He loved watching her rest her hand on her stomach, loved the conversations they had about their hopes for their child, loved imagining their family growing. "What do you want?" Hannah asked one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. "A boy or a girl?" "I don't care," Warren said honestly. "I just want both of you to be healthy and safe. Though I will say, if it's a girl and she's anything like her mother, I'm going to have my hands full." Hannah laughed. "And if it's a boy like his father, stubborn and protective and kind?" "Then we'll have our hands full together," Warren said, pulling her close. The summer was busy with ranch work, but Warren made sure to be around the house more, not wanting Hannah to overexert herself. She still insisted on cooking and keeping house, though she accepted help from Pete's wife, who came by a few times a week now that Pete had brought her from town to live on the ranch. In September, as Hannah grew larger and more uncomfortable, Warren began to panic slightly. What if something went wrong? What if he lost her? The thought of going back to a life without Hannah was unbearable. "Stop worrying," Hannah told him one night, seeing the fear in his eyes. "I'm strong and the doctor says everything is progressing normally. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time." "Not my woman," Warren said. "Not my baby." Hannah softened at that. "I know you're scared, I'm scared too, but we have to have faith that everything will be all right." The baby came on a cool October evening, just as the first frost touched the prairie grass. Warren paced downstairs while the doctor and the midwife attended Hannah, and Pete and Joe tried to distract him with coffee and conversation. But all he could hear were the sounds from upstairs, and all he could think about was Hannah, going through this pain and danger. Then, finally, a baby's cry pierced the air, and Warren was up the stairs before anyone could stop him. He burst into the bedroom to find Hannah propped up in bed, exhausted but glowing, holding a tiny bundle wrapped in a blanket. "It's a boy," she said, her voice tired but full of joy. "Warren, we have a son." Warren approached slowly in awe. Hannah pulled back the blanket to reveal a red-faced infant with a shock of dark hair. "He's perfect," Warren breathed, reaching out to touch the baby's tiny hand. His son grasped his finger with surprising strength, and Warren felt tears stream down his face. "He's absolutely perfect." "Want to hold him?" Hannah asked, and carefully transferred the baby into Warren's arms. Warren looked down at his son and felt his heart expand in ways he hadn't known were possible. This tiny person, this perfect little life, was his and Hannah's. They'd created him out of their love, and now he was here, making their family complete. "Thank you," Warren said to Hannah, his voice choked with emotion. "Thank you for this gift, for him, for everything." "Thank you for building me a house and staying," Hannah said, reaching up to touch his face. "Thank you for saving me and loving me and giving me this beautiful life." They named him William Thomas Dalton, after Warren's father and Hannah's first husband, honoring the past while looking toward the future. Little William was a healthy baby with strong lungs and an appetite to match, and Warren couldn't get enough of him. He'd come in from the range and head straight upstairs to find Hannah nursing the baby or rocking him to sleep, and those moments felt sacred somehow, like glimpses of something holy. The first year of William's life passed in a blur of sleepless nights and first smiles, of learning to be parents together, of watching their son grow and change every day. Warren had never known love could expand like this, that he could love Hannah even more for being such an incredible mother, that he could love his son with an intensity that sometimes frightened him. When William was a year old, Hannah told Warren she was pregnant again. This time, Warren was less panicked and more excited, having been through it once. Their daughter arrived the following summer, a tiny perfect thing with Hannah's green-brown eyes and Warren's stubborn chin. They named her Margaret Rose, and William was instantly fascinated by his baby sister, wanting to help with everything. Life on the ranch settled into a new rhythm with 2 children. The house that had once been too big was now filled with the sounds of family. Children laughing, feet running on the stairs, bedtime stories and lullabies. Hannah still retreated to her little house sometimes when the children napped, and Warren made sure she had that time, that space, that independence she valued. But mostly they were together, the 4 of them, building the life they'd both dreamed of. Years passed in this way, marked by seasons and milestones. William learned to ride almost before he could walk, sitting in front of Warren on the saddle, absorbing everything his father could teach him about ranching. Margaret was quieter but no less determined, preferring to help her mother in the garden or with the cooking, though she could also handle a horse when she wanted to. When William was 5 and Margaret 3, Hannah gave birth to twin boys, Samuel and James, who brought chaos and joy in equal measure. Warren looked around his dinner table, at his wife and 4 children, at Pete and Joe who'd become like family, and felt grateful beyond words for the life he'd built. "Remember when it was just me eating alone at this table?" Warren said to Hannah one evening after the children were in bed. "I remember," Hannah said, settling into his arms on the porch swing. "I remember a lot of things. Living in that tent, wondering how I'd survive. You riding up on your horse, offering me hope." "I didn't know what I was doing that day," Warren admitted. "I just knew I couldn't ride past without stopping." "It was fate," Hannah said simply. "We were meant to find each other, meant to build this life together." "Do you ever regret it?" Warren asked. "Giving up your independence, tying yourself to a stubborn rancher in a house full of children?" Hannah turned to look at him, and in her eyes, he saw all the love they'd built over the years. "I didn't give up my independence. I chose to share my life with someone who respects it, who built me my own house just to prove he understood. I chose love and partnership and family. And I've never regretted it for a single moment." "Good," Warren said, kissing her softly. "Because I plan to keep you around for a long, long time." More years passed, bringing changes and challenges. The railroad reached Wichita, making it easier to transport cattle to market. Warren's ranch continued to thrive, growing into one of the most successful operations in Kansas. William grew into a capable young man, ready to take over the ranch someday. Margaret proved to have a head for figures, helping Warren with the accounts. The twins were still young but showed every sign of being as stubborn and determined as their parents. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Warren took Hannah back to the place where her tent had stood all those years ago. The land was different now, part of Wichita's expansion, with houses where there had been empty prairie. "You remember?" Warren asked, his arm around his wife. "Every detail," Hannah said. "I was hanging laundry when you rode up. I was tired and scared and trying so hard to keep going. And then you stopped and you looked at me like I mattered and everything changed." "You did matter," Warren said. "You mattered then and you matter now and you'll matter for the rest of our lives." They stood there together. 2 people who'd found each other against all odds, who'd built a life and a family and a love that had endured through everything. Hannah leaned into Warren's shoulder, and he held her close, thinking about that young woman in the tent, about the impulse that had made him stop that day, about how one moment of compassion had changed both their lives forever. "What are you thinking about?" Hannah asked. "About how lucky I am," Warren said. "About how I built you a house, but you built me a home." Hannah smiled up at him, the same smile that had captured his heart all those years ago. "We built it together," That's what makes it perfect. As the sun set over the Kansas prairie, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Warren and Hannah stood together, two souls who'd found each other in the wilderness and created something beautiful. Their story had started with a tent on the edge of town, and a rancher who couldn't just ride by. It had grown into something neither of them could have imagined. A love that had weathered every storm, a family that filled their home with joy, and a partnership built on respect, trust, and unwavering devotion. When they finally turned to head home, it was hand in hand, walking toward the life they'd built together, toward the house that stood as a testament to their love, toward the family waiting for them. And if anyone had asked Warren Dalton whether he regretted stopping that July day in 1878, whether he regretted offering work to a stranger living in a tent, he would have laughed and said it was the best decision he'd ever made. Because he hadn't just built Hannah a house. He'd found his purpose, his partner, his home. And he'd stayed just as she had, two people who'd found in each other exactly what they needed, exactly when they needed it. The ranch continued to prosper over the following years, becoming a landmark in the region. William, now grown at 23, had proven himself more than capable of handling the day-to-day operations, giving Warren more time to enjoy his family and the fruits of his years of hard work. Margaret, at 21, had married a young lawyer from Wichita and was expecting her first child, making Warren and Hannah grandparents for the first time. The twins, now 16, were attending school in town while still helping on the ranch during weekends and summers. Hannah had aged gracefully, her hair now streaked with silver, but her eyes still held that same spark that had captured Warren's heart all those years ago. They'd weathered everything together, droughts and harsh winters, good years and lean years, the challenges of raising 4 children and the bittersweet pain of watching those children grow up and begin lives of their own. Warren himself was 53 now, his own hair gray at the temples, his hands weathered from years of ranch work. But he felt younger than his years, energized by the life he and Hannah had built, by the legacy they were leaving for their children. One spring morning, as they sat on the porch drinking coffee and watching the sun rise over the prairie, Hannah turned to him with a thoughtful expression. "You remember what you said to me the day we met?" she asked. Warren thought back to that July afternoon so many years ago. "I said a lot of things. Which part are you thinking of? You said maybe you cared because it was the decent thing to do, and maybe because I reminded you that there were still folks trying to make an honest living, no matter how hard it got." "I remember," Warren said, reaching for her hand. "Why? Because I've been thinking about that. About how one act of decency, one moment of compassion changed both our lives. What if you'd ridden past that day? What if you'd convinced yourself it wasn't your concern? Then I'd have missed out on the best 25 years of my life," Warren said simply. "I'd have stayed alone in this big house, making money but not really living. I'd have missed you, missed our children, missed everything that matters." Hannah squeezed his hand. "I want to do something. I want to help other women who find themselves in the situation I was in, alone and struggling and trying to maintain their dignity." Warren turned to look at her, intrigued. "What did you have in mind? What if we turned my little house into something more? What if we used it as a place where women could stay when they're between situations? Not charity exactly, but a hand up, like you gave me. A safe place to stay while they figure out their next steps, maybe with opportunities for work or training." Warren felt pride swell in his chest. This was so like Hannah, wanting to take her own experience and use it to help others. "I think that's a wonderful idea. We could expand it, build a few more small cottages, maybe create a program where they can learn skills, get help finding work." Exactly, Hannah said, her face lighting up with enthusiasm. We have the resources now to make a real difference, and I want to honor what you did for me by doing the same for others. They spent the next months planning and building, creating what became known as Hope Cottages. Warren provided the land and materials, while Hannah organized the program, reaching out to churches and businesses in Wichita to create a network of support. The first cottage was ready by fall, and their first resident was a young widow with two small children who'd lost everything in a house fire. Watching Hannah work with these women, seeing her share her own story and offer both practical help and emotional support, Warren fell in love with her all over again. She had taken her own pain and struggle and transformed it into something that brought hope and help to others. It was the ultimate testament to her strength and character. Margaret gave birth to a healthy baby boy that winter, and Warren held his first grandchild with tears in his eyes. "Your grandmother and I, we built all this for you," he whispered to the sleeping infant. "We built it from nothing, from tent and hope and love, and now it's yours, all of yours." Hannah stood beside him, watching him with their grandson, and she thought about the long journey they'd traveled together. From that tent on the edge of town to this moment, surrounded by family and legacy and love, it had been a remarkable life. When spring came again, William announced his engagement to a schoolteacher from town, a bright young woman named Catherine whom Warren and Hannah both adored. The wedding was set for June, and preparations consumed the household in the best possible way. "Another generation starting their journey," Hannah said to Warren one evening as they walked through the pastures, something they still did regularly despite their advancing years. "Reminds me of us," Warren said, "though hopefully William won't have to rescue Catherine from a tent." Hannah laughed, the sound as beautiful to Warren as it had been 25 years ago. "No, he won't, but he'll build his own story with her, just like we built ours." They walked in comfortable silence, the kind that comes from decades of partnership, from knowing each other so well that words aren't always necessary. Finally, Hannah spoke again. "Warren, I need you to know something. I need you to know that choosing you, choosing this life, was the best decision I ever made. Even in the hardest moments, even when things were difficult, I never once regretted it." "I know," Warren said softly. "Same here, Hannah. You were my salvation, my partner, my home. Everything good in my life comes from that day I stopped and couldn't just ride past." "Promise me something," Hannah said, stopping to face him. "Promise me that if something happens to me, you'll remember the joy. Not the ending, but the whole story. Promise me you'll remember the love and the laughter and the life we built." "Nothing's going to happen to you," Warren said, a chill running down his spine. "You're strong as an ox, Hannah Dalton." "We're all mortal," Hannah said gently, "and I'm not planning on going anywhere anytime soon. But I want you to promise me anyway, because I want the same from you. I want to remember joy, not sorrow." "I promise," Warren said, pulling her close. "But you're not allowed to leave me for a long, long time yet. We have grandchildren to spoil and Hope Cottages to run and a life to keep living." "Deal," Hannah said, relaxing against him. The years continued their steady march forward. William and Catherine married and moved into a house Warren built for them on the ranch property, starting their own family. Margaret and her lawyer husband thrived in town, eventually having 3 children. The twins went off to university, one studying agriculture and the other veterinary medicine, both planning to return to the ranch eventually. Hope Cottages expanded to 5 small houses, helping dozens of women over the years. Some stayed only briefly, getting back on their feet quickly. Others needed more time and support, but all left with more than they'd arrived with, thanks to Hannah's vision and compassion. Warren and Hannah celebrated their 30th anniversary, surrounded by children and grandchildren, by friends old and new, by the community they'd become such an integral part of. Looking around at all the faces, at all the love they'd cultivated, Warren felt a contentment so deep it was almost overwhelming. "What are you thinking?" Hannah asked him, as she had so many times over the years. "That I'm the luckiest man who ever lived," Warren said. "And that I'd do it all again exactly the same way just to end up right here with you." Hannah kissed him in front of everyone, not caring who saw. "I love you, Warren Dalton, today and always." "Today and always," Warren echoed, holding her close. As the party continued around them, Warren thought about that scared young man who'd come to Kansas 35 years ago with nothing but determination and dreams. He thought about the woman in the tent, struggling to survive but refusing to give up. He thought about the moment their paths had crossed, about the choice he'd made to stop and offer help, about how that single decision had rippled out to touch so many lives. The ranch would continue after they were gone, passed down through the generations. Hope Cottages would keep helping women who needed a hand up. The love they'd built, the family they'd created, the community they'd fostered, all of it would endure as testimony to what two people could accomplish when they chose compassion and love over indifference and fear. That night, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet again, Warren and Hannah lay in bed, hands clasped between them. "It's been a good life," Hannah murmured, drowsy and content. "The best life," Warren agreed. "And it all started with a tent on the edge of town." "And a rancher who built me a house and stayed," Hannah added softly. "And stayed," Warren confirmed. "Always stayed, always will." They drifted off to sleep like that. Two souls who'd found each other against all odds, who'd built something beautiful from nothing, who'd proven that love and compassion could change the world, one act of kindness at a time. The seasons turned, as they always do. Warren was 60 when he realized one morning that Hannah was moving slower than usual, that she seemed tired in a way that concerned him. He insisted she see the doctor in town, and the news wasn't good. Her heart was wearing out, the doctor said gently. It happened sometimes with age. There wasn't much they could do except make her comfortable. Warren felt like the ground had dropped out from under him. 32 years they'd had together. 32 years that suddenly seemed both like forever and not nearly long enough. "I'm not ready," he told her that night, holding her in their bed. "I'm not ready to lose you. I'm not ready to go," Hannah admitted. "But Warren, listen to me. We've had a beautiful life. We've loved well, raised good children, made a difference in this world. That's more than most people get. If my time is coming, I can face it knowing I lived fully, that I loved completely, that I mattered." "You've always mattered," Warren said fiercely. "You'll always matter." Hannah lived for 2 more years, years where Warren barely left her side. William took over running the ranch completely, giving his father time to be with his mother. They spent those years talking and reminiscing, taking gentle walks when Hannah felt strong enough, sitting together on the porch watching sunsets, saying all the things that needed to be said. One spring morning, with wildflowers blooming on the prairie and the sun streaming through their bedroom window, Hannah slipped away peacefully in her sleep, Warren's hand in hers. She was 62, and she'd lived every year to its fullest. Warren was devastated. For weeks, he moved through his days like a ghost, unable to imagine his life without Hannah in it. But slowly, he began to remember his promise to her, to remember the joy instead of just the grief. He remembered her smile, her laugh, her strength, her compassion. He remembered building her that little house, their wedding day, the births of their children, all the small moments that had made up their life together. And he found comfort in the legacy they'd built. In William and Catherine raising their children on the ranch, teaching them the values Warren and Hannah had instilled. In Margaret's successful family in town. In the twins, both back on the ranch now, contributing their skills and knowledge. In Hope Cottages, still helping women in need, still spreading the compassion Hannah had embodied. Warren lived for 10 more years after Hannah's death, long enough to see his grandchildren grown, to watch the ranch prosper under William's leadership, to see Hope Cottages expand to other towns. He never remarried, though there were opportunities. Hannah had been his great love, his perfect partner, and he was content to live with her memory. When Warren Dalton died peacefully in his sleep at 72, surrounded by his children and grandchildren, his last thoughts were of Hannah. Of her face that first day by the tent, of her joy when he'd built her the little house, of the life they'd created together. The ranch stayed in the family for generations, as did the story of Warren and Hannah. How a rancher had seen a woman in need and offered her not charity but opportunity. How she'd taken that chance and built something beautiful. How their love had transformed not just their own lives but countless others through Hope Cottages, and the example they'd set. The little house Warren had built for Hannah became a memorial of sorts, preserved exactly as it had been, a reminder of what love and respect looked like. Young couples from the family would sometimes go there, sitting in the reading chair or looking out the window, drawing inspiration from the story of their ancestors, who'd proven that real love meant seeing another person's worth and honoring their independence, even while building a life together. William's eldest son eventually wrote a book about his grandparents, documenting their story for future generations. The book ended with Warren's words from one of his last interviews, given when he was 70. People ask me what the secret was to our long, happy marriage. They want to know some trick or technique, but it was never complicated. I saw someone who needed help and I offered it. She took that help and turned it into something greater than either of us could have accomplished alone. We respected each other, trusted each other, built each other up instead of tearing each other down. And we never forgot where we started, with a tent on the edge of town, a hand offered in kindness, and a choice to build something together. That's not just the secret to a good marriage. That's the secret to a good life. The Dalton Ranch thrived well into the 20th century, adapting to changing times while maintaining the core values Warren and Hannah had established. Hope Cottages evolved into a full nonprofit organization, eventually offering not just housing but job training, childcare support, and educational opportunities. The organization helped thousands of women over the decades, each one benefiting from Hannah's vision and Warren's support. Every year, the family held a gathering at the ranch in October, commemorating the day Warren had first stopped to speak to Hannah. They'd share the story with the youngest generation, keeping alive the memory of where they'd come from and the values that had shaped their family. The tale of Warren and Hannah became legendary in Kansas, a story of how compassion and love could change lives, how one person's choice to stop and help rather than ride past could ripple through time, affecting generations. Schools taught their story, using it as an example of the best of the pioneer spirit, not just rugged individualism but community care, not just survival but thriving through lifting each other up. And on the prairie where Hannah's tent had once stood, where Warren had first seen her and felt his life shift, someone eventually placed a historical marker. It reads simply, "Here stood a tent. Here began a love story. Here started a legacy." May we all have the courage to stop, to help, to build, to stay. Because that was the real moral of Warren and Hannah's story. Not that happy endings are guaranteed or that life is always fair, but that when we choose compassion over indifference, when we offer help without demanding submission, when we build up rather than tear down, when we stay rather than walk away, we create something that lasts far beyond our own lives. Warren had built Hannah a house, yes. But more importantly, he'd seen her worth when she was at her lowest, had offered her a chance to rebuild her life on her own terms, had loved her not despite her struggles but inclusive of them, as part of the whole person she was. And Hannah, in accepting his help, had shown equal courage. The courage to trust again after loss, to accept kindness without losing herself, to build a partnership where both people could thrive. Their story became a testament to the best of human nature, to the possibility of redemption and new beginnings, to the power of one moment of kindness to transform everything that follows. And as long as the Dalton Ranch stood, as long as Hope Cottages served women in need, as long as people told the story of the woman in the tent and the rancher who built her a house and stayed, that legacy would continue, inspiring others to choose compassion, to offer help, to build love that lasts. The end.